On a deserted street, a German shepherd lay slumped against a wall, his fur torn open by deep, raw wounds. People passed by, averting their eyes. Everyone thought he was already gone. But when one stranger stopped, what followed was a story of courage, compassion, and a miracle no one expected. The street was eerily quiet, lined with cracked bricks and scattered trash that told the story of neglect. Against one wall, slumped in the shadows, lay a German shepherd. His fur, once strong and glossy, was now clotted with blood. Deep, raw wounds carved into his body, exposing muscle and torn skin. Flies buzzed around him, and yet, beneath the stench of decay, there was still breath, shallow, but present. People passed by, some slowing for a brief glance before hurrying on, unwilling to face the sight of suffering. To them, the dog looked beyond saving, just another victim of cruelty left to fade into the dirt. But if anyone had paused long enough, they would have noticed something remarkable. His eyes, half closed, dulled by pain, yet they still flickered. With life, a desperate plea hidden behind exhaustion. Hours passed, the sun shifting overhead, and still the shepherd did not move. He was a silent figure of abandonment, waiting for either death or a miracle. And that miracle was about to arrive. As the afternoon heat pressed down, the shepherd stirred weakly, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Every breath seemed to cost him strength he didn't have. His body trembled when he tried to shift, the wounds pulling painfully against his skin. For a moment, it looked as though he would give up, but then his head lifted ever so slightly, defying the weight of his suffering. His tongue flicked out, dry and cracked, searching the ground for even a drop of water. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but thirst burned stronger, leaving him panting shallowly. Each attempt to stand sent his legs buckling beneath him, forcing him back into the dirt. Still, there was no whimper, no cry, only a silent endurance that spoke volumes about his will to live. Though the world had abandoned him, the shepherd's spirit hadn't surrendered. His eyes scanned faintly toward the road, desperate for someone, anyone, to see him. It was not the body that kept him alive now, but the fragile spark inside, a hope that refused to be extinguished. Just as the last rays of sunlight began to fade, footsteps echoed down the street. A man carrying a worn backpack slowed as his eyes caught the figure slumped against the wall. At first, he thought it was too late. The shepherd looked lifeless, a shadow of what he once had been. But then, he saw it. The faint twitch of an ear, the shallow rise of a ribcage. The dog was still fighting. The man knelt carefully, his heart tightening at the sight of the terrible wounds. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small bottle of water. Unscrewing the cap, he poured a little into his hand and extended it. The shepherd hesitated, eyes cloudy with mistrust, but then his tongue stretched weakly, lapping at the drops. For the first time in days, relief touched his broken body. Encouraged, the man whispered softly, his voice gentle against the weight of the silence. The shepherd's eyes softened. In that moment, he understood he wasn't alone anymore. Someone had finally stopped to care. The man knew a sip of water would not be enough. The shepherd's wounds were too deep, his body too fragile. With trembling hands, he slipped his jacket beneath the dog's frail frame, lifting him gently. A pained whimper escaped the shepherd's throat, but he didn't resist. Instead, he leaned into the stranger's arms, as if surrendering to the only chance he had left. The man hurried toward his car, every step echoing the ticking of a clock. He laid the shepherd carefully across the back seat, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The engine roared to life, and the car sped through the night. Every red light felt like an eternity, every bump in the road a cruel reminder of how fragile the life beside him was. The shepherd's breaths grew shallower, his eyelids fluttering as if he might slip away at any moment. "Stay with me," the man pleaded, glancing at him through the mirror. He pressed harder on the accelerator. It wasn't just a drive anymore. It was a desperate race against time. The clinic doors burst open as the man carried the limp shepherd. Inside, the receptionist froze, gasping at the sight, before calling urgently for the vet on duty. Within seconds, Dr. Harris, a seasoned veterinarian with years of emergencies behind him, rushed forward. But even he stopped in his tracks when he saw the dog's condition. Blood matted the shepherd's fur, and deep wounds carved across his side like cruel signatures of neglect. Dr. Harris knelt, carefully parting the fur, his hands steady though. His eyes betrayed disbelief. "How is he even still alive?" he muttered under his breath. His team gathered, exchanging grim looks as the dog let out a faint groan, his tail twitching ever so slightly. A fragile reminder that he hadn't given up. "Prep the operating room, now," Dr. Harris barked, snapping out of shock. The man, who had rescued the shepherd, stood back, his fists clenched in silent prayer. The vet's voice softened as he looked at the dog. "Hang on, boy," he whispered. "If you fought this hard already, we won't let you go now." The hours that followed were a blur of stitches, bandages, and whispered instructions. Dr. Harris and his team worked tirelessly, cleaning the wounds, closing the gashes, and fighting infection that had already begun to spread. The shepherd lay, motionless under anesthesia, a fragile figure between life and death. By the time the last suture was tied, exhaustion weighed on everyone in the room. But against all odds, the dog had survived the night. Recovery was not instant. It was a slow, grueling climb. The first days were the hardest, his body too weak to stand, his eyes too clouded to focus. But the rescuing man visited daily, sitting by the cage, offering gentle words and steady hands. Weeks turned into months. Each day brought small victories, standing without collapsing, eating a full bowl, barking softly at the sight of familiar faces. The scars on his body would never fade completely, but the light in his eyes grew stronger. Hope had finally returned. His fur had begun to regrow, shiny in places where only scars once remained. He walked with a slight limp, but each step was filled with determination. When he barked, the sound was strong again, echoing through the clinic halls like a declaration of survival. People who had once walked past in silence now visited with food, toys, and donations to help cover his medical bills. Children knelt beside his pen, stroking his fur while their parents whispered about the miracle they were witnessing. The dog who had been left for dead was now a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of compassion. One afternoon, the rescuer returned, kneeling to meet the shepherd's eyes. The dog pressed his head into the man's chest, tail wagging furiously. It was more than gratitude, it was love. Against all odds, he had been given not just life, but a second chance to live it fully. The day finally came when the shepherd was well enough to leave the clinic. The staff gathered at the doorway, some wiping away tears, as the rescuer clipped a new collar gently around his neck. Gone was the frail, broken figure they had feared wouldn't survive. In his place stood a dog, scarred but strong, his eyes burning with life and gratitude. As they stepped outside, sunlight bathed his coat, and for the first time in months, the shepherd lifted his head high. He paused, inhaling the fresh air, then pressed against the man's leg with a soft whine. The rescuer knelt, wrapping his arms around the dog as if to seal a promise. He would never be abandoned again. Onlookers clapped, but many turned away, overcome with emotion. That evening, in his new home, the shepherd curled up on a warm bed beside the man who had saved him. His breathing slowed, peaceful at last. From being left to die on a lonely street, he had found love, family, and life again, and his story left the world in tears.